Hi, thanks for tuning in. Today we're going to be reviewing Lolita, Vladimir Nabokov's 1955 classic. Even if you've never read this book or seen the 1962 Stanley Kubrick film, you've very likely heard of it, and rightfully so, because the subject matter is, to say the least, controversial. It's the story of a pedophile named Humbert Humbert and his obsession for a 12-year-old girl whose real name is Dolores Hayes. Interesting, Dolores means Our Lady of Sorrow, but referred to almost exclusively in the novel by Humbert as Lolita. Now, interesting fact, Nabokov knew how controversial this novel was, and a story has him en route to the publisher trying to throw the manuscript into the garbage and being stopped by his wife because she recognized it as a work of art. The novel opens with an introduction by Humbert's lawyer revealing that he is in prison for murder, and then shifts towards Humbert telling the story of his life. He describes his somewhat upscale childhood in Europe and his growing fascination for adolescent girls. Now, he terms girls that seem to be somewhat sexually promiscuous as nymphets, and we'll speak about that term a little later. Humbert knows that his attractions are wrong, and he marries to protect himself. That marriage naturally fails, given his predilections, and he flees to the US, where he meets and marries a woman named Charlotte Hayes, purely to get close to Charlotte's 12-year-old daughter, Dolores, aka Lolita. Now, Humbert is an obviously unreliable narrator. He is convinced that he's gorgeous, charming, erudite, intelligent. And it doesn't take much reading to see through that and realize that he is a pompous ass. He's delusional and he's vain, and his intelligence is minimal. Now, Charlotte, his wife, dies suddenly, and Humbert finds himself in the position of guardian to Lolita. Even though that's not her name, I'm going to use that term just for the sake of clarity. He forces Lolita into a sexual relationship. Humbert convinces himself and tries to convince the reader that he truly is in love with this girl and that he has her best interests at heart. He swings back and forth between fatherly concerns, such as worries over her schoolwork, and sexual appetites. The reader does sense that he has a vague idea that what he is doing is wrong, and at times he does admit it. For example, the morning after he first rapes Lolita, he gives her the choice of staying with him or being sent to a foster home. Lolita makes what is a very limited choice in tears and agrees to stay with him. Humbert says to the reader, "You see, she had no choice." Now, the prose of this novel is so beautiful. And it's interesting because the introduction points out, and readers would have to agree, that although the subject matter is appalling, the novel itself is not at all dirty. The rape scenes tend to take place off the page. The molestation scenes are described in such metaphorical, lush prose that they almost convince the reader that Humbert isn't actually doing what he's doing. Now, one of the most famous scenes in the novel is one where Humbert masturbates to completion with Lolita on top of him without her knowing about this. The language used to describe this scene is such that a normal child could pick up the book, read the scene, and they likely wouldn't understand what was going on. That is the most appalling part of this novel. Not that the subject matter is so disturbing and disgusting, even though it is, but that the narrator manages to disguise it. And for most readers reading this novel, it's very clear that Humbert is a narcissist and a con artist. But the worst thing that he does is erase Lolita from the narrative. We don't actually know very much about his victim. We know that she's not good in school, that she loves to act, that she reads comic books, and that Humbert thinks she's attractive. He spends far more time describing her physical qualities than describing anything else about her. The most disturbing part of this novel is actually the public's reaction to it. The term nymphette that we mentioned earlier has actually entered common usage, as has the word Lolita, and both of them refer to sexually enticing, promiscuous young girls, or in another term, jailbait. Nabokov apparently didn't want any sexual imagery associated with the book's design either. If we look at this cover and other covers I've seen covers with close-ups of doll mouths or child's feet. It's very clear that society has glorified and even romanticized this. The magazine Vanity Fair has a quote on the cover of this book calling it the only convincing love story of our century. And a review I read some years ago says that the story is not about Humbert corrupting Lolita, but about Humbert being corrupted by Lolita. And I don't know any further explanation of victim blaming. Further, most of the reviews of the book don't describe to the fact that Humbert is repeatedly raping Lolita and forcing her into sexual slavery. They talk about the relationship between the two of them. Now, as someone who loves literature and loves storytelling, this is a book that if you want to write or if you love language, you should read. Nabokov's first language wasn't English, and it is astonishing because this is written so beautifully. There's a quote from John Updike about Nabokov saying that he writes prose the only way it should be written, that is to say, enthusiastically. This book is filled with metaphors, puns, double entendres, and other forms of wordplay that native English speakers may have to go back and read 2 or 3 times to understand. Once again, the subject matter is appalling, and it's meant to be so. So if this is a book that you can manage to get through, it is worth the read. Keep in mind that while Nabokov is rightfully condemning pedophilia, he's not going so forward in a straightforward manner, and it may be a little bit difficult to understand.